Hi folks, how you doing? It's James, JT at the movies, and we are back for episode 20 of Debriefing 007. Now we're in a different location this time. You're probably wondering where we are. Now those of you that are eagle-eyed and maybe keen viewers on this channel might actually recognise this as the old movie space, the movie corner in my bedroom before I got the movie room downstairs, and it's now my home office. So this is where I edit all the Debriefing 007 videos on my computer here, and I thought, you know what, for a change, whilst Laura's using the movie room, I'll shoot the video up here instead and have the logo up on the screen. But let's dive in to 2002's Die Another Day. So this film came out in 2002 and was a really big celebration film for the James Bond franchise. It was the 40th anniversary of the franchise. Dr. No had come out in 1962, and this was a really, really big celebration, as I say, for the producers. They did TV specials where they got previous Bond actors back. They had, video games released at the time, not tying with the film, but other games had come out around the sort of time. And there was, like I say, this real big sort of sense of pride around James Bond, and really sort of celebrating the whole sort of tenure of the series at this point. The directing duties this time were taken over by Lee Tamahori, who I'm afraid I am going to have to say did a really poor job with this film. He really didn't understand the character or the source material that it was based on, and had to be reined in several times by the producers and the writers for some of the outlandish things that he wanted to change. At one point, he even wanted to bring Sean Connery back to play an aged 007, and really wanted to introduce the codename theory, which I'm sure James Bond fans will be familiar with, but for anybody who's not, it's the fact that James Bond and 007 are a complete codename identity, and that every time there is a different actor, so Connery, Moore, Lazenby, Dalton, etc., it's actually a different person taking on that role, and that the previous agent that has personified James Bond has either died or retired. So Lee Tamahori wanted to bring that into the canon of the film, and wanted to have Sean Connery come back to give some almost sort of fatherly advice to Brosnan's Bond. At which point the producers pointed out to him that it is actually meant to be the same character based on Ian Fleming's James Bond of the novels in what they consider to be a floating timeline of about 20 years. So when you look at Dr. No from 1962 through to the end of Roger Moore's tenure, that generally works quite well in a roughly 20-year period, and you see the character age. Then when Timothy Dalton takes over, that character has been through all the same adventures, just maybe not in the same sort of time frame. But at some point in his past, he's gone off against Goldfinger and battled with Red Grant on the train, and had dealings with Hugo Drax in space, etc. All those things have happened to those Bonds. And I think the Bond video game 007 Legends that came out about 10 years ago perfectly encapsulates this, even if the game itself wasn't very good. So like I say, Tamahori wanted to do that, and he wanted to bring Connery back, and they had to remind him that no, it is the same character, and in just the film previous they'd made a very subtle mention to Tracy, and obviously in License to Kill Tracy's mentioned, and there are nods and winks obviously throughout the series that let fans know that it is definitely meant to be the same character, and that it's just a different actor playing him. When the film went into pre-production, the producers were actually considering adapting the novel Moonraker, obviously not using the title as it had previously been used, but taking the elements of the novel, which were largely ignored for the 1979 Eon film Moonraker, and turning that into a story. In fact, the character of Miranda Frost was initially named Gala Brand after the character in the Ian Fleming novel originally, but those plans were soon scrapped, and we got the Die Another Day that we all know and love today. I'm going to be honest, folks, and put this out here before I do a plot recap. I don't like this film. It is the only film in the official franchise that I actually dislike. The rest of them, I can take something away from them, and I would say largely on the whole I like all of them. This film is such a missed opportunity and feels so poorly made that I get infuriated almost watching it. And I know I've sort of used this turn of phrase quite a lot through the Debriefing series, that I only watch a film if I'm doing a series run through. Nothing is more true of that saying than for this film. I only watch this film if I'm doing a run through of the series. In fact, the last time I watched Die Another Day, before watching it last week when I did the all-dayer with Laura, was probably in 2016 when me and Laura first got together. Let's dive into the plot, shall we? So in the pre-title sequence, James Bond infiltrates a North Korean military base where Colonel Moon is actually trading conflict diamonds for weaponry and fancy cars. And Bond is posing as the diamond dealer, and obviously he's there to try and bring this guy down. Moon's right-hand man, Zhao, who's one of the sort of the secondary villains of this film, is alerted by an unknown source that James Bond is actually an MI6 agent there undercover, and of course all hell breaks loose. A gunfight ensues, which ends up with Moon and Bond in a hovercraft chase over the demilitarised zone in Korea. And it's a really tense scene, to be fair. Now, this film, for everything I've just said, starts off really, really strong. And it takes a lot of brave sort of decisions, if you like, in the opening sort of credits of the film, the pre-title sequence, and through the opening credits and the first sort of 20 minutes thereafter. It's just after that it sort of drops off. But Bond and Moon are in this battle on their hovercrafts. They're shooting at each other. They're blowing up landmines in the floor as they're racing through the demilitarised zone. And ultimately, Moon drives his hovercraft off the edge of a cliff that they're battling near, and he's presumed dead. Bond is then captured by the North Koreans and taken prisoner by General Moon, the father of the now believed to be deceased Colonel Moon. And it's at that point we dive into the title sequence. Now, I'm going to applaud slightly and also berate at the same time the title sequence. So the title sequence is one of only 2 entries in the series that I can think of, the other being Casino Royale. And if I've missed any, let me know in the comments down below, where the actual overarching story of the film continues throughout the title graphics. And we see Bond imprisoned in North Korea being tortured with scorpions and with waterboarding and other methods of torture, and we see him becoming more and more dishevelled to the point where we come out of the other side of the title sequence and it's 14 months later. He's still in the clothes that he was arrested in. His hair's all grown out and shaggy. He's got a big beard. He's not had a wash or been obviously looked after at all for any of that point. And it's really, really harrowing stuff, and it's not the sort of thing that you would expect for a Bond film. And again, like I say, the producers, the writers, and even the director have taken that creative step to do something a little bit different, and it works quite well for that bit. Now, where I'm going to berate the title sequence, I bet you can guess. Who let Madonna write the theme song for this film? It is appallingly bad. It is an absolute travesty that song made it into the film. I cannot believe that the producers listened to. Well, I can believe it because they signed off on It's Just Another Way to Die as well, didn't they? And some of the other bits and bobs that have come over the years as well. They let Eric Serra do that, didn't they? And Tomorrow Never Dies with Sheryl Crow's miserable song as well. So I can believe that they'd sign off on it. But yeah, what an appalling song, and given what a fantastic composer David Arnold is and what a great songwriter he is. They could have teamed him up with, Don Black or any of the other previous lyricists, Tim Rice, or, like I say, any of the other previous musical collaborators, and they could have done something absolutely fantastic with that title. And whilst I'm not a fan of David Arnold's electronic score that turns up throughout this, there's some beautifully orchestrated moments, especially towards the end of the film. And there's actually some themes, if you listen closely, that he reuses for Casino Royale towards the end of the third act. So there's some beautiful music in there that I'm sure he could have written a really haunting theme that would have really brought that to life just a little bit more. But that's enough about the title sequence. As I mentioned, Bond's held captive for 14 months, and then all of a sudden, out of the blue, he's traded in a trade-off with Zhao, who's been captured by the Americans. Later in Hong Kong, well, Bond's actually on a hospital ship and actually under arrest by the British government. M informs him that secrets had started leaking out of the prison in North Korea where Bond was being held, and they were sensitive British secrets, and they assumed that he cracked under pressure, and so they had to get him out, which is why they orchestrated the trade-off between Zhao and Bond. So, understandably, M and the British government and the Americans that they've been working in tandem with weren't happy that they've had to release a terrorist to get an agent hemorrhaging secrets back. Bond believes that he's been set up and protests his innocence to M, but she doesn't want to hear it, and basically says that he'll be sent off to an evaluation centre while she decides what she wants to do with him. After escaping from MI6 custody and making his way back to Hong Kong, Bond checks into a hotel in a rather amusing scene, and a scene that's almost reminiscent from Russia with Love. And that's actually something that this film does quite a lot. Just to jump off on another side note, is with it being the 40th anniversary film, the producers and the writers decided that they were going to sneak in as many nods and winks as they could to the previous 19 entries. And so if you sort of watch them with a keen eye, you can sort of spot them. But like I say, in a scene that's reminiscent from Russia with Love, Bond ends up realising that he's been spied on in his hotel room. And he's been spied on by the Chinese Secret Service. Again, this was a part that was actually written for Michelle Yeoh's Wei Lin to reprise her role from Tomorrow Never Dies, but again, either due to scheduling conflicts or the script being changed or whatever the reason was, it never came to be. And so we're introduced to Chang, who's another agent that Bond's had dealings with. Bond informs him of what he intends to do and that he wants to settle the score with Zhao. Chang then sets him up with a new passport, some money to get from A to B, and lets him know that Zhao is now in Cuba. Bond then heads to Cuba to chase down Zhao, and it's there he meets this film's leading lady, played by Halle Berry, Jacinthia Johnson, abbreviated to Jinx. Now, I am a Halle Berry fan. I really, really do like some of the fantastic films that she's put out over the years, and really enjoy her in most things that she turns up in. She is appalling in this. Absolutely appalling. It's unbelievably bad. It's probably on a par with Catwoman bad. But there we go. So he's introduced there. They have a bit of a one-night stand. And again, you probably notice, if you've seen the Die Another Day trailers or you've seen the film, that she comes out of the ocean in a scene that's very reminiscent to that of Ursula Andress coming out of the ocean in the first Bond film, Dr. No. Again, just another callback, another throwback, if you like, to the series gone by. After their one-night stand, Bond follows Jinx to a gene therapy clinic where patients can have their appearances altered through rewriting of the DNA. Bond locates Zhao there and a bit of a commotion ensues, and he's unfortunately unable to kill him, but Zhao does leave behind a selection of diamonds which are identical to African conflict diamonds, similar to the ones that Zhao and Moon were trading at the beginning of the film, but these ones have been engraved with the mark of Gustav Graves, a British billionaire. Jinx also makes a daring escape from the facility after being chased by guards, and it's at that point that Bond puts two and two together and realises that she's an NSA agent. Being intrigued by Graves, Bond does some research and discovers that he'd only appeared on the scene a year previous after discovering a vein of diamonds in Iceland, and this has suddenly launched him into obviously massive wealth and then celebrity as well, and he's sort of the new sort of in bloke at the moment. We actually catch up with him at a scene later in the film, which is reminiscent of the opening to The Spy Who Loved Me, where he's arriving at Buckingham Palace via Union Jack parachute to get his knighthood. The film then jumps over to Blades Club, which is something that's taken out of the Moonraker novel, though in the novel it's where M goes to play cards and it's not a fencing club like it is in Die Another Day. But at the Blades Club, Bond meets up with Graves and the two of them have a little bit of a back and forth that eventually leads into a duel. We're also introduced to Miranda Frost at this point, who is played by Rosamund Pike. She's an undercover British agent also investigating Gustav Graves and is posing as his personal assistant. Bond and Graves continue to fence, and the fight becomes a little bit more aggressive, bordering on violent really, when Graves suggests that the winner is first one to draw blood from the torso. Of course, Bond ends up besting him, as Bond always does, and Graves, wanting to be a humble loser, offers Bond the chance to come out to Icarus, which is his new scientific demonstration at the site of the mine in Iceland. In possibly one of the last good scenes in the film, M then sends for Bond and lets him know that the British government also have their doubts about Gustav Graves, and that Bond's story and Graves' story have now come to a sort of a crossing point, and they now believe that Bond has been set up and that he is now useful to the British government again. He has his 00 status reinstated and he's sent off down to Q Branch to meet up with the new Q. So if we remember back from The World Is Not Enough, Desmond Llewellyn's Q, who'd been Q from 1963's From Russia With Love, retired at the end of the last film, and sadly Desmond passed away in real life not long after the film came out as well, so obviously his reprisal was not possible. But we were introduced to Q's assistant, nicknamed R in the previous film, played by John Cleese. And I mentioned in my last review that John Cleese really didn't work for me in that film. I actually found him quite annoying. But in this film I find him much more endearing and much more like the character of Q that we know and love. You can tell that Bond's apprehensive of him, and this was something that my dad always said watching it. He says you can tell because he calls him Quartermaster until the end of the briefing, where he's really impressed with the Aston Martin Vanquish, which obviously has the invisibility camouflage camouflage technology. I bloody hate that thing. But Dad loved it. And at the end of the scene, he stops calling him Quartermaster, and then Q says something along the lines of, well, if you read that, it should only take you a few hours. And then Bond throws it up, and the guns on the car shoot it, and shot through it in a couple of seconds, Q. And it's sort of like that, yep, you've earned your title sort of thing. So I do actually quite like the Q briefing. Now, this is, for me, where the film completely trails off and just goes into complete lunacy. Like I say, there are some promising moments up to that point. The pre-title sequence was great. I don't mind the scene at the Blades Club and the whole sort of setting up of, you know, the sort of Gustav Graves character and where does he link into this, and is General Moon still relevant to anything, and why is Zhao involved with both of them, and all that sort of thing. Not so sure about the gene therapy side of things, although I'm sure if you haven't seen the film you can probably figure out where this is going. If you have seen the film, then obviously you know what ridiculous plot twist is coming up. We then cut to Iceland at the ice palace that Graves has built for all his guests at the site of his diamond mine. Graves gives a speech where he unveils his new satellite project, Icarus. The satellite can reflect sunlight and give 24-hour sunlight wherever it's needed around the globe. And the sort of speech that he gives is that it's going to be for agricultural purposes and growing crops and ending world hunger, and sort of playing into this sort of philanthropist role that he's sort of been building for himself since he's come on the scene. Jinx, working for the NSA, has also come to Iceland to investigate Graves, and after a briefly amusing scene with Bond where they call back to their one-night stand earlier in the film, she goes off to investigate Graves in his private quarters, but is soon captured by Graves and Zhao. Bond rescues Jinx, who's been held up in a scene reminiscent of the laser scene in Goldfinger. And unlike that film, where that scene is done expertly, and obviously Bond fans will know Goldfinger is not my favourite in the series, but I obviously can give it the credit where it's due. It has some absolutely amazing moments. But unfortunately, when they try and replicate it in Die Another Day, it's not an amazing moment. Rather than the tense interaction between hero and villain that we get in Goldfinger, in this we get Halle Berry tied up to the desk whilst the laser's about to cut her in half. And what is she doing? She's making Yo Mama jokes. Really, who signed off on that? Honestly. The mind boggles, it really, really does, and they wondered why this film wasn't a success. But anyway, Bond manages to rescue her, and they later catch up with Graves, who reveals that he is none other than Colonel Moon, the character presumed dead from the pre-title sequence, and that he's gone through the gene therapy himself to reinvent himself as an Englishman, and it's all part of his grand master plan that we learn as the rest of the film goes on. It's at this point that Miranda Frost also reveals that she is a double agent, in fact, and is actually working for Graves and not the British government. She also reveals that she's the agent that betrayed Bond in North Korea at the start of the film. After using one of the gadgets that Q gave him, Bond makes his escape, and we enter one of the stupidest films in the entire franchise, not just the film, but the franchise, where James Bond is under chase from Zhao and some of Graves' goons, and they set Icarus after him, and obviously it's in Iceland, there's lots of ice, and the ice is melting around him, and it causes a tsunami. So what does Bond do? He kite surfs an ice tsunami. Ridiculous. And the CGI has not aged well at all. Do you know, I remember even thinking as a kid that was a step too far. And obviously watching this as I'd been 10 when Die Another Day came out, you can imagine that, you know, most 10-year-olds will probably think, cool, you know, explosions and this and that and the other. I'm sat there thinking, yeah, this is a step too far, even for how outlandish and silly James Bond can get. Bond then returns to the palace to rescue Jinx, who's been captured and she's been held captive there. He's able to free her by using his Aston Martin Vanquish to drive through the door of the room that she's locked in. And obviously Icarus has been melting the palace this whole time, so she's been slowly left to drown in the room full of melting ice. Bond's able to resuscitate her, and in a fairly silly scene again, he's able to finally kill Zhao by dislodging a chandelier from the roof, which falls through the roof of Zhao's car that he's been giving chase to Bond on, squashing him. Bond and Jinx then go after Graves and Frost by stowing away in the cargo hold of Graves' plane. We then get a scene where Graves introduces himself to General Moon, who was Colonel Moon's father from the beginning of the film, the general that locked Bond up. Graves reveals that he is in fact Colonel Moon, his son, and explains that the true reason for undergoing the gene therapy and having his death faked and building his whole identity as Gustav Graves was to be able to build Icarus so that he could carve a way through the demilitarised zone so that North and South Korea could finally be united again. General Moon is obviously horrified by this and explains that it will lead to World War III, but Graves obviously is completely crazy at this point and doesn't want to hear it and kills his father. Bond and Graves then engage in a fight, and this is another really silly point that the film decides to act upon. I can't believe that there was any more silly choices that they could make with this, but they managed it. They managed it, folks. Graves puts on what I can only describe as like an Iron Man costume, and it's basically Icarus, but in like a weaponised costume form. Bond and he end up fighting. At the same time, Jinx is trying to take control of the plane, but ends up in a fencing duel with Miranda Frost. The plane then passes through an Icarus beam that Graves has fired, and of course that cuts a hole in the fuselage and the plane begins to descend. Graves tries to escape with his parachute, but Bond ends up sabotaging that, and Graves, again, much like Goldfinger, is sucked into the engine of the plane. Jinx is able to kill Miranda Frost, and then Jinx and Bond are able to escape with a helicopter that's stowed aboard the plane in a scene that's quite reminiscent of the end of The Living Daylights. I suppose you'll see what I mean as I've gone along in this review, folks, if maybe you'd not sort of picked them out yourselves when you'd watched it. There are a lot of sort of not even subtle homages to the Bond films gone by. We then get the usual classic Bond and leading lady secluded somewhere whilst superiors are looking for them. They're having a romantic encounter. They're rolling about playing with the diamonds. And that's one thing that I really want to sort of talk about as well, is there are so many puns and sort of double entendre in this film and sort of really, really cheap metaphors for things. And, you know, this scene was no exception. It's not quite as bad, I don't think, as the Christmas Only Comes Once a Year bit, but it's not far behind it. It's a close second. And this was the scene actually that I was talking about, the sort of the final scene of the film, where David Arnold uses a beautiful bit of score, which he definitely reuses cues from in Casino Royale. And it's such a shame that the score turned out the way it did, because this is definitely not his best work. So as you might have guessed, folks, I'm not a Die Another Day fan. This film is not one that I enjoy. I think it is such a missed opportunity, and it's such a shame that Pierce Brosnan had to go out on such a lacklustre film. And given that it was for the 40th anniversary of the franchise as well, I think it's just such a shame that that anniversary is marked by this misfire, really. There are so many things that I could point out that are wrong with this film for my taste, and I would think that most Bond fans would probably largely agree with me. Of course, this film, like all films in the series, has its defenders, and you know what? If you enjoy it, more power to you, because film is absolutely subjective, isn't it? And it'd be a really boring world if we all liked the same thing. I wish I liked this film. I really do wish I liked this film, but I don't, and I just can't forgive it. The one thing I can forgive it for is that if this needed to exist so that we get Casino Royale with Daniel Craig, then so be it. Like I mentioned before at the start of this video, the director really didn't understand the source material that he was working with, and I'm not too sure what conversations took place between Barbara Broccoli and Michael Wilson and the director, and even the writers as well, but it really feels like they've taken such a step away from what Bond is and what it should be, and sort of lent into the outlandish and the gadgets and all the silly things again, that it's no wonder that they decided that they needed to take a step back with Casino Royale for the next one. Die Another Day, for me, I think summing it up, is a missed opportunity. There are some pockets of good things in here, but on the whole, it's a real dumpster fire, is this film, and it's such a shame that Pierce has to go out on that. I would give this film a 4 out of 10. So there we are, folks, my lowest rating of the Debriefing series thus far, and definitely my least favourite film in the franchise. I would even go so far as to say I'd take Never Say Never Again over this film. That's how much I dislike it. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. I'd love to know what you guys think of this one. Do your thoughts echo mine, or is it actually one of the films in the series that you enjoy? I'd love to have a natter with you about it. It's great to chat to you all in the comments on these videos, and I do appreciate your consistent support with it. please drop the video a thumbs up, and if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please think about doing so. I make videos like this where I talk about the James Bond series. I make videos talking about collecting physical media, DVDs, Blu-rays, 4Ks, even VHS and Laserdisc from time to time. And my channel is purely just about my love for movies and physical media. So if that sounds like your cup of tea, hit the subscribe button and stick around. I'd love to keep you around for a little bit longer. Above all else, folks, as I always say, take care of yourselves, and I look forward to seeing you again really soon as we review the 21st Bond film and the first in the soft rebooted continuity with Daniel Craig, 2006's Casino Royale.